Thanks, everyone. Let's pray together. Father, it is good to be back. This place is our home, but not for long. It's our home for only a little while, because you are our home. And oh, Lord, I hope I can speak for everyone here when I say, I can't wait to get home. I can't wait to see Jesus. I can't wait to hold his hands and see with my own eyes the price that he paid for me and to thank him in his presence. I can't wait. But until then, we got work to do. And so we're here. We occupy this place to bring others into your kingdom so that they too can worship you and know you. Lord, I pray that you would be glorified in the preaching of this message. I pray that your word for each person here would come through loud and clear, and that we would be obedient to it. For the sake of your Son and for our joy while we wait for him. Amen. Well, welcome back to Genesis. It's been a while since we've been in Genesis. We took a 9-week recess from Genesis through the summer. And here's what we did. We followed Simon Peter as he experienced Jesus firsthand. So we looked at Jesus through the eyes of Simon Peter. But now we're back in Genesis. And in just a few weeks, you'll be happy to know, I hope you'll be happy to know, that we will be entering into the story of Joseph in just a few weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. And that is the story which occupies the majority of the book of Genesis. While it's true that Adam and Abraham and Noah, they've received probably the most notoriety from the book, it was Joseph's life that Moses, who wrote this book, decided to devote the majority of his time. Joseph. So there's a lot for us to sink our teeth into and learn from in the life of Joseph. And we'll probably be there for roughly 10 years or so. No, I'm hoping to be done with the book of Genesis in another year. So I hope you're not in a hurry, because there's a lot to be gleaned from the life of Joseph. So until then, however, before we shift our focus onto Joseph too quickly, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, we still have some ground to cover with Jacob. There's some things happening with Jacob and his family that are extreme, to say the least. We're coming to a very extreme chapter in the book of Genesis, one that is shocking to read. At least I think it's shocking. Well, I'm certain that every one of you remembers precisely where we left off 10 or so weeks ago. I'm certain you all have it perfectly remembered where we were. I'm just going to remind you just in case. This is where we left off. Jacob is Abraham's grandson. And he's just gone and gotten a wife for himself, and they've had children. 11 boys and 1 girl. That's where they're at right now. And Jacob is making his way back from Paddan Aram back to the promised land, Canaan, to see mom and dad, Isaac and Rebekah. That's where they live. So they're making this long journey across the desert. And most scholars agree this took probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 or so years to make this journey. Because they stopped and they made camps in certain places and stayed there for many years. So this is a long journey. And while he was on his journey, he got word that his brother was making his way towards him. And remember, Esau, his brother, wasn't real happy with Jacob. They were estranged, to say the least. Esau vowed to kill Jacob. So, the last we left off, these two brothers reconciled. That's what happened in the end of Genesis chapter 33. So what's happening now? Well, let me tell you. Jacob and his family, which is a very large family with a huge entourage. Remember, Jacob is very wealthy at this point. They've made their way back to the very outskirts of Canaan. And as soon as he enters in, he sets up camp in a city, around the outskirts of a city called Shechem. Shechem. And this city was named after the prince of that land. The guy who ruled it was named King Hamor. And Hamor had a son whom he named after the city, Shechem. So when we read this chapter, you're going to see Shechem is the name of a person, but it's also the name of a city. Now here's what you need to know. When Jacob came and set up camp in this land, he must have liked it a lot. You know why? He bought it. Remember, he's a pretty wealthy guy at this point. He liked this land, so he bought it. That's where we find Jacob today. Now, as you've probably noticed, if you've been following along with us through this journey, this hasn't been a very easy time for Jacob, right? He's gone through a lot of hardship. Almost a war with his brother, wrestling with an angel where he got his hip injured really bad and he walked away with a limp. Just incredible hardships and challenges and confusing things that have set his life on a totally different course. Had his name changed from Jacob to Israel. All kinds of things have happened over the last 15 or so years. But nothing could possibly have compared to what we're about to read today. Nothing could have prepared this man for what is about to happen. This kind of hardship, most people never have to deal with. With that in mind, I've assigned today's message a title. And it's a title which I hope will invite each of us to explore what we, the people of God, ought to do when really horrific things come to us. Either we see horrific things or we experience them on our own. From the minute day-to-day things that really hurt us, our soul, they cause scars, to the major things that we see happening around the world that are heinous and disgusting to watch. How are we supposed to respond as the people of God? Before we read the text, I thought, boy, and I prayed, Lord, I got to give these people a way to really put themselves in the mind of Jacob and his family. Otherwise, this chapter is going to seem really hard to identify with. So, I want to give you 3 common scenarios of Christian people. These are 3 common scenarios, and you have a job here. So you're not allowed to tune out. You have to find the theme in all 3 of these scenarios. I'm going to go through them quickly. Scenario number 1, let's put the first picture up on the screen, is Sam and Gertrude. Both Christian people, they both go to church. Sam and Gertrude have been married for 23 years. Gertrude here had come to faith in Jesus when she was 11 years old. Sam had kind of just told Gertrude that he was a follower of Jesus. Kind of there was some evidence that he was. He goes to church every single week, but kind of on the fence about it. But they've been married for 23 years, and as you can tell from the picture, things aren't going so well. You see, Gertrude has been as faithful as she can to the Lord Jesus Christ since coming to faith at 11 years old. She does everything in her power to be obedient to him, and she's exemplified Jesus in her marriage to the best of her ability. How's she done that? She's been submissive to her husband, even though sometimes it's been really hard for her. But she's done it to the best of her ability. Sam, on the other hand, has been predominantly self-centered in the relationship. Now, that doesn't mean that weren't times where Sam was the good guy and Gertrude was the bad guy. There were good times in their marriage, really good times, lots of laughs. But for the most part, if we were watching the movie of Sam and Gertrude, all of us would come away going, Sam, get your focus off yourself for once. That's pretty much how we would describe this relationship. Well, in the most recent 5 years, Sam's self-centeredness had reached a new degree. You see, he's been going out late at night, doing things he hadn't done in years, kind of carousing a bit, and he's been abusing Gertrude verbally. Just yelling at her, calling her names. And let me tell you, Gertrude has reached her threshold. Enough is enough. She has reached a point where she is no longer able to be the kind of godly wife that she once had been. And so here's what happened in Sam and Gertrude's relationship. I've changed the names in case you're wondering. Gertrude decided to have an affair with someone she met online. Because she decided it's not right for this guy to get away with a lifestyle of sin. It's just not fair. Maybe this will wake him up. That's scenario number 1. Scenario number 2. Stacy and Melody. Stacy and Melody, this is Stacy, this is Melody on the right-hand side. Yeah, you're right too. They've been best friends since high school. The closest of friends, like blood buddies. And they decided even to go to the same college together. And they decided to room together. They got an apartment. This is when they got their apartment. They were so excited to do it. Best of friends. Well, after the first year of rooming together, Stacy told Melody that she wanted to branch out a bit and decide to room with somebody else for the remainder of their college time together. Here's why. Melody has some very unique personal habits that made it difficult to live with. Nothing wrong, just unique. She was a hard person to live with, did some weird things. And so Stacy, because she valued the friendship so much and loved Melody, she thought, you know what? Before this starts to wreck our friendship, I think it's best if I just get a new roommate because I love Melody so much. Well, Melody didn't really understand this very well, and she took it deeply personal. She was so hurt. Didn't matter what Stacy said. No, it's because I love you. It's because I love you. She wasn't hearing it. She was crushed by this. And so, guess what she did? She slandered Stacy all over the college campus, spreading just rumors and gossip about this girl who she loves. She'd lay down in traffic for her, but her pain caused her to do this. She even called friends from where they went to high school and was spreading rumors about her. Can you imagine? Last scenario number 3. This is Kyle. He just looks like somebody you'd want to be friends with, right? This is Kyle. Kyle has been the exemplary employee. He's worked for the same company for 20 years, since he was a teenager. He's only called out of work twice in those 20 years, and he was sick both times. He's never been late. In fact, in 20 years, he was voted Salesman of the Year 6 times. That gives you a kind of idea about this guy's work ethic. Well, one afternoon, Kyle was called into his supervisor's office, who told him that he was being let go because they had discovered that he was stealing clients from another employee, another salesman. When the truth of the matter is, Kyle here was covering for a buddy of his who hadn't been doing his job. And so he was handling his clients along with his buddy's clients, but his supervisor wouldn't hear it. They didn't even let him get a word in. So they fired him. And Kyle couldn't believe it. 20 years I've devoted to this company. I come in when I'm sick sometimes. I cover for people. So in this atrocity, in his outrage, guess what Kyle did? This Boy Scout of an employee. On his very last day, he emailed himself the entire client database, started a competing company, and over the next 5 years, he stole 35% of their clients. So guess what happened? The company that he worked for 20-some years downsized, and many of his friends were let go and were out of work because of what Kyle did. Were you able to see the theme in all 3 scenarios? The hint was the title of the message, Playing God. If you still aren't able to see it, let me help you. Each one of these people in each scenario took something that belonged to God. Namely, his right to justice. God and God alone owns justice. We do not. It is not ours. Ultimately, it belongs to God. Listen to the Apostle Paul and what he says. I bet you everybody probably knows what I'm about to read. It's a common verse. Children learn it. Romans 12:19 says this. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. What God means when he says vengeance is mine is that a man or a woman who belongs to him ought never to take the law into their own hands. Ever. No matter what. Not on a major scale or on a micro scale. Underneath your own household. Never. Perhaps the most freeing, I hope you'll hear this. I learned this years ago. Perhaps the most freeing and liberating thing that I've learned in my short time as an adult is that it is not my job to have someone in my life pay for their sins. It's not Ashley's job to make me pay for my sins, and it's not my job to make Ashley pay for her sins. Thank God for that I am freed of that responsibility. God will deal with Ashley, and God will deal with me. That is a freeing and liberating truth that you should bring in first to your households. And second, into every other aspect of your life. It is not your job to make any other person pay for their sins, and it is not your job to make anyone else pay for their sins. Now listen, while a person's crimes against us may be very hard to overlook, think back over your life about the number of times that someone has wronged you, like the scenarios I just named. Here's why God says, vengeance is mine. And we're taking something from God, because no matter how atrocious those crimes against us might feel, they are nothing in comparison to the way it feels to God. Nothing. Nothing. Let me explain why. I thought sometime this week, spent a while thinking about what the most heinous thing anybody could ever do to me would be. I want to take 10 seconds. I'm going to be totally quiet. I want you to think, what is the worst thing that anyone could do to you? Think it through. As I was thinking it over, I came to realize there's a lot that I could overlook. There are some bad things people have done to me over the past, and by the grace of God, I was able to really, truly, in my heart, forgive them and stay friends with them. I bet you probably think the same. And yet, as I thought this through and really asked God to help me with this, I'm going to tell you, if someone was to hurt my wife or my daughter intentionally, or my son, the Adam in me, it would take an act of God to keep me from getting at you. Just speaking as a man who's still wrapped in flesh. They are the most precious thing that I have. And if something was to happen to them by your hand, God better intervene. He better. That would be the worst thing that could happen to me, is if you hurt my daughter or my wife or my son. I bet if I asked just the dads, I only can identify with dads. I bet if I asked the dads, you'd say, yes, he's right. God has put that in us. You hurt my wife or my daughter, I'm going to avenge them. That's what I would want to do. But here's why it would be wrong. Because as much as I adore them, they're only mine for a little while. Ultimately, Ashley belongs to Jesus. And ultimately, Peyton belongs to God. And Logan belongs to God. Who am I to take it from their heavenly Father, who looks down and says, that's my daughter. And Jesus, that's part of my bride. That's my son. Luke, not even you can take what is rightfully mine, and vengeance is mine, declares the Lord. Not even you, their temporary father, their temporary husband, has the right to take what is mine. The perfect father and the perfect bridegroom, he reserves the right to justice, not even me. Is everybody with me? This is why vengeance is mine is such a beautiful truth. He loves us that much that we should entrust to him that which is totally his. Now listen, with that backdrop, I think we're finally ready. I gave you all that because without it, we will never be able to get into the mind of Jacob here in this atrocious thing we're about to read. Genesis 34. Open there. Let's read it together. Genesis 34, the whole chapter, says this. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, remember that's the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her and lay with her, means he raped her, and humiliated her. And his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, Hamor's the king, saying, get me this girl for my wife. Now Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob held his peace until they came. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. The sons of Jacob had come in from the field as soon as they heard of it, and the men were indignant and very angry because he had done an outrageous thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing must not be done. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife. Make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us and take our daughters for yourselves. You shall dwell with us and the land shall be open to you. Dwell and trade in it and get property in it. Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me, I will give. Ask me for a great bride price and gift as you will, and I will give whatever you say to me. Only give me the young woman to be my wife. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to them, we cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who's uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you will become as we are by every male among you being circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters to ourselves, and we will dwell with you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and we will be gone." Their words pleased Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem, and the young man did not delay to do the thing, because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most honored of all his father's house. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, "These men are at peace with us. Let them dwell in the land and trade in it. For behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters as wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this condition will the men agree to dwell with us and to become one people, when every male among us is circumcised as they're circumcised. Will not their livestock, their property, and all their beasts be ours? Only let us agree with them, and they will dwell with us." And all who went out of the gate of the city listened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of the city. On the third day, listen carefully, church, when they were sore, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure, and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city, because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field, and their wealth, all their little ones and their wives. All that was in the houses they captured and plundered. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, You've brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household." But they said, "Should he treat our sister like a prostitute?" And that's how the chapter ends. The big idea or main point for this entire chapter, there's only one, I believe, and it comes from the life of Jacob and his family and what their reactions were to this moment in their lives. Big idea for today is this: revenge results in ruin. Every single time. In your life, in my life, revenge results in ruin. Now there are three distinct ways that we can see right from this example in Jacob's family about how this is so. How every time, from the micro level, when your husband doesn't do what you ask him to, so you accidentally spill bleach on his shirt, whoops. Those things, to the major levels, like we're reading right here. Every single time it will result in ruin in your life. Let's look at point number one, how this works itself out. Revenge results in ruined righteousness. That's a lot of R's. Here's what I mean. Another way of saying it: if you decide in your life you're going to become a vigilante, taking the law into your own hands, it will make you a villain in the eyes of God. Did you hear what I said? If you're going to take the law into your own hands, look, Lord, I know you say it's wrong, but it's got to be done. I'm sorry. I know you'll forgive me in the end. You become the villain in the eyes of God. Now, it's my job to prove that to you. Look back with me at verses 25 through 29. This is where we're going to focus, 25 on. So just the end, how the people of God responded. On the third day, when they were sore, can you imagine how sore these men were? Two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi. Now, here, keep in mind, this is the second-born and the thirdborn. The oldest son was Reuben, second-born and thirdborn. Dinah's brothers. They took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure and killed all the men, slaughtered them. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword, and they robbed them. They took their daughter Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. Now, the sons of Jacob, this implies all of them, all the boys, all 11. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city. They're looting here, folks, because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field. All their wealth, and this is the most shocking part to me, all their little ones and their wives, all that was in the houses, they captured and plundered. Now listen very carefully. If you read this just on the surface level, you're never going to be able to understand what's really happening underneath the surface. So please, 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 please listen very carefully. Here's what's really going on here. these people in Shechem, they had a completely different worldview than these Israelites, these people of God. We would have a very difficult time getting into their minds. But do you notice when Hamor, the king, and Shechem, the one who just raped their daughter, came walking over to Jacob's house, they walked over like, hey, we wanted to ask your permission for your daughter's hand in marriage. And did you notice Shechem said, listen, dad-to-be perhaps, if you find me to be pleasing in your sight. He just raped his daughter. How does his mind get to this place where you could possibly think that you'd be pleasing in my sight? Unless this was not a crime in their culture. Let me compare it to something that if you follow the news and study up a bit, I know one person in here will know exactly what I'm talking about. You'll understand a little bit better. This is very comparable to the modern Shiite Muslim. Okay? A Shiite Muslim is the most faithful or most radical of the two primary branches of Islam. There's a Sunni, which is kind of like what you might compare to a lukewarm Christian. Okay? And then there's the Shiite. These are the ones who are, we call them radicals. Do you know why we call them that? Because they actually believe what they read in their holy book. That's why they actually have faith. So we call them the radicals. I hope someone would call you a radical Christian, because you actually believe what your book says. These Shiite Muslims, if you go into their culture, here's what we tell our missionaries. I know because one of our closest friends, Leah, was sent to Iraq to be a missionary. You know what they taught her? Don't you ever go out in public alone. Why? Because they can do to you, in some places, the same thing that we're reading about here with Dinah. And they don't consider it a crime, because women are property. That's why when you get trained to be a missionary, you need to know stuff like this. Not much has changed. And so now, here's this. Listen, Dinah is about 14 or 15 years old. That's only a few years older than my daughter. And she decides in the beginning of the chapter, it says, I'm going to go out and just take a look at what the women of the land are like. So here's curious teenage daughter Dinah. Bye, Mom and Dad. And she goes out by herself into the culture. If Ashley and I were going to be missionaries in Iraq, which was a possibility for us, we would know. We don't let our daughter go out walking the streets by herself. She's going to get raped or taken as property. So here she goes out into the land to see the women of the land. And when she goes out there, a prince sees her and he goes, whoa. And you know what's interesting? Do you remember what happened when Sarah went out alone? The people of Egypt saw Sarah and they were like, whoa, she's gorgeous. So if she happened to get the good looks of grandma, which she might have, Dinah goes out and here's this gorgeous Hebrew woman, not Hebrews yet, but Hebrew woman going out in public on her own. It's no wonder this prince who didn't think he was doing anything wrong would have the nerve to come to this family. Is it starting to make more sense now? And they even invited them, come on in, live as neighbors with us. We'll even give you some of the land. They had no idea what an offense this would be to these Jewish people. And so now we can get into their mind and understand a bit better. So Dinah's two big brothers, Simeon and Levi, they go out and they slaughter them all. They take all their property. Now I want to bring this to our day and age. Listen, folks. These guys were vigilantes. They took the law into their own hand. Do you know, this idea of the vigilante has become incredibly popular in our culture. If we were, listen carefully, if we were to take this story, put it up on the big screen and make a Hollywood picture out of it, and we were to take these men whose sister or daughter was just raped, we were to take these men and put masks on them, a cape, and put a bat symbol on their chest, we would cheer them on. Yes, go get them. Justice is done. Because they're the Avengers. We love the Avengers, right, Logan? We love the Avengers. We buy t-shirts with these guys on it. Because justice is being done. Is it right? What they've done? But in our culture, we pay billions to cheer this kind of story on. We love it. It's become the American way to avenge for ourselves and get justice. Batman, Superman, the Avengers, these might be the most loved American icons, at least in my time. As I was driving home the other day, a little while back, I thought to myself, am I ever a Christian avenger? Do I ever take from God what is rightfully His? And I had to think, man, I think I do it often. Here's what I mean by that. Remember what happened on the night when Jesus was betrayed and arrested? Do you all remember? You should, because I just spent 9 weeks preaching on the life of Peter. When Jesus was arrested, remember what Peter did? They all came and they seized Jesus, and Peter took his sword and whoosh, lopped off the ear of one of the soldiers, right? Now let me tell you, Peter didn't say, hold still for just a second, and cut his ear off. These were heavy swords. You know what that tells you? He was aiming for his neck. He was trying to cut this man's head off because Peter saw the most outrageous betrayal of innocence he'd ever laid eyes on in his life. You're here to arrest Jesus? Where's my sword? And he went for the guy's neck and happened to chip his ear. Listen to what the innocent one spoke up and said to this guy, Peter, who took the law into his own hands. Listen to what the innocent one says. Matthew 26, 50 through 54. Then Jesus, the innocent one, said to him, put your sword back into its place. Put your sword back into its place. For all who take the sword, all who try to get revenge, to be the avenger, will perish by the sword. Do you think that I cannot, listen to what he's saying, do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and He will at once send me more than 12 legions of angels? In other words, what is he saying? It's the will of God, Peter. Step back. But how then should the Scriptures be fulfilled that it must be so? He's saying, Peter, he might just as well have been saying once again, get behind me, Satan. You're standing in the way of the will of God. And we would have said, right on, Peter, chop it off. Wouldn't we? If I was there, I probably would have too. But vengeance belongs to the king. Peter had no right to take the law into his own hands. A vigilante Christian, I told you I was wondering if I ever did that. A vigilante Christian is somebody who says this to God in times of hardship. Lord, listen, I've been praying to you again and again and again and again for you to do something about this situation where justice just hasn't been done. I've been waiting and waiting, and I'm sorry, but you just take too long. I know it's wrong what I'm about to do, but it's got to be, somebody's got to make this guy pay for this. Somebody's got to make her pay for what she's doing. I know you'll forgive me, so I'm off to do what you're obviously too busy to do. This is what we say when we decide we're no longer going to wait on the Lord. This is why the Lord says, vengeance is mine. I wondered if I ever do it. So in the very next verse, after Paul says, vengeance is mine, listen to what he says. This is hard. He says, if your enemy's hungry, Romans 12:20, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. Stop right there. If your husband, who's been having an affair, is hungry, make him dinner. What? Yep. Let's go on. If he's thirsty, give him a drink. For by doing so, you will heap burning coals on his head. Now listen to me, church. This will take a kind of maturity and a kind of faith I'm not so sure I've seen, except for a few examples in my life. A few men that have exemplified this kind of men and women. My grandmother's one of them. Who've had this kind of maturity to say, no matter what you do to me, I will be faithful to my God. No matter what, if my husband leaves me, if my children leave me, if the whole world betrays me, I belong to Jesus. And I'm obedient only to Him. Who among us could do this? Who among us? We should strive for it, yes. This is the kind of faith Jesus had, the kind of faith I'm longing for. Jacob's mind went immediately to another result that revenge took. Point number two. Point number two. Revenge results in a ruined reputation. This is probably the most obvious point in the text. Look at what it says. Verse 30, one verse. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You've brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land. He's talking about his reputation. The Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household. So I said point number 2 is revenge results in a ruined reputation. Another way of saying that is becoming a vigilante makes your God stink in the eyes of the people who are looking at your life. Now look, this is probably the most obvious point in the whole text, so we're only going to spend a few minutes on it. It's very obvious. What Jacob is saying is, look guys, we have this name on us. We're travelers through this land, sojourners. This is somebody else's land and we're walking through it. God hasn't given it over to us yet. It's still occupied by other people. So we're making our way through here and we have been given a new name, the name of the people of Israel. Jacob probably reminded him, my name's been changed now. We represent a God and you've made my name stink. Well, listen, what's more important? Making the family name stink or the name who they represent? This is what's really going on here. The God whom they represented, his name, which we just sang about this morning, his name was being dragged through the mud. Now listen, playing God, the name of the sermon, playing God by taking matters into your own hands makes Jesus stink in the eyes of the people who are looking at your life to see what he's like. They would be right if they looked at my life. Listen carefully. If they looked at my life when great tragedy comes or hardship. That guy's a pastor, right? I've heard he's a pastor. And I decided that in those times, I was going to avenge the wrong that was done on me and take matters into my own hands. They would be right in saying, look, this guy who claims to have a personal relationship with God, the guy who claims to know him personally, he must not like what he's come to know about him because he won't even wait on him for his will to be done. He'd rather take his will into the matter. Listen, our faith isn't shown by what we do when things are good, is it? No one cares what we do when things are good. People are watching what we do when things go haywire in our lives. And they'd be right in saying they don't really believe like they say they do. They claim to trust in Jesus, but when things go bad, they do just what I do. They take matters into their own hands. They get their own way. It was his name that was being dragged through the mud. So here's how I want to end point 2. I told you it was going to be quick. Final question I want you to ask yourselves in point number 2. Does the action, you can repeat this to yourself all throughout the day, does the action I'm about to take have the potential to drag my God's name through the mud? And if it even has the potential, it might be something I want to think twice about doing. It's a very simple test you can do for yourselves. Does it have the potential? If not, maybe you want to think twice about it. Point number 3, the final point for today. Revenge results in ruined reasoning. This might be the most important point. Said a little differently, becoming a vigilante makes you and I into a corrupt judge. Did you hear me? Becoming a vigilante, taking the law into your own hands, makes you and I into a corrupt judge. I hope you're scratching your head. Let me show it to you. Last verse. This chapter ends abruptly, and I think I know why. Verse 31, these are the brothers who did this, speaking back to Jacob. Should he treat our sister like a prostitute? This is their line of reasoning. Dad's saying, guys, you ruined us. You ruined us. They're saying, should we just let this guy do what he did? They justified their actions by coming about it, by coming up with a way of self-justification in their mind. Okay? This is what they did. It's as if they're saying, should he be allowed to get away with sin? We had to do what we had to do. It's far too common with the people of God today to do the same thing. I want to put something, I made a little chart. I love charts because I'm a visual learner. So I made a little chart. I want to put side by side what their reaction was when they felt they had no choice but to sin. And what some of the more common reactions I've heard, and you've probably heard too, when people feel their back is up against the wall. Look, Lord, I'm sorry, but I just got to do this. Okay, here was their response. Their response was, should he treat our sister like a prostitute? Come on, Dad, this is your baby girl. Here's some more common ones. Should he or she be allowed to cheat me out of my money? They've been robbing me for so long. Why should they have? I worked hard for this. I'm going to get what's coming to me. God would only want me to get what's mine, right? Should he or she be allowed to bully me? I got rights. Gone on long enough. Next, should he or she be allowed to be unfaithful to me over and over and over again? I told you about a man that I know whose wife had 8 different affairs. He's still by her side. I don't know how he's done it. He's an example to me. And you know what he does for a living? He vacuums. That's what he does for a living. Boy, I got lessons to learn from that guy. Lastly, this is a comical one because it's the most common example that I've seen in my own life. Should he or she be allowed to drive like that? He's going to kill someone. There's no cops around. Look, honey, I know it's wrong, but I got to teach this man a lesson. So I'll get in front of him, I'll slow down, maybe slam my brakes on a little bit. That'll show him. These are examples when we think and talk with a distorted reasoning. Should he be allowed to treat our sister like a prostitute? I know it was wrong. I know it doesn't represent our God, but justice had to be done, and I'm not willing to wait. This is really hard. If acted upon, any one of these statements up here, these excuses, they demonstrate a frustration with the one whom we believe is allowing it to happen. Lord, where are you? Can't you see? Are you on vacation? Don't you see what's going on down here? Why aren't you doing something about it? Are you sleeping? That's what we're frustrated with. You know, Jesus was telling his disciples, as he was getting ready to leave, to depart and go back with the Father, he was telling his disciples about what the world would look like just before he came to get them again, second coming. He was describing in Luke chapter 17 about the rapture of the church. He was saying, one will be in a field, 2 will be in a field, 1 will be taken, the other left. You probably heard this passage before. He said 2 will be in a bed, 1 will be taken, the other left. You probably know the passage. Immediately after, the next thing that comes out of his mouth is a lesson about how to survive in a world where it seems like God has just kind of left the scene. He's just kind of checked out. Because earlier he told them that, you know what would characterize that time period? Lawlessness and injustice. This is what he said. People will be lovers of this kind of thing. Everywhere you look, injustice, injustice. In the government, judges, everybody's corrupt. And we're down here going, Lord, what are you going to do? Why are you just overlooking all this? Can't you see? When are you going to do something? Jesus tells them this parable to tell them, and by extension us, what to do. Don't you want to know? Because I think we're living in that time. He tells them the parable of the persistent widow in the very next chapter. Luke chapter 18, verse 1 through 8. And he told them a parable to the effect that they ought always to pray and not to lose heart. That means be discouraged beyond repair. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected man. Not a very good judge. And there was a widow in that city who kept coming to him and saying, give me justice against my adversary. For a while he refused. But afterward he said to himself, though I neither fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice, so that she will not beat me down by her continual coming. Or your translation may say, wear me out by her continual coming. And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge says. And will not God give justice to his elect, who cry to him day and night, day and night? Will he delay long over them? I tell you, he will give justice to them speedily. Nevertheless, and listen carefully to what he says at the end here, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? Now that might be confusing to you, so let me explain it to you real quickly. The point of the parable is that God will bring about justice at the right time. You all know that. I've been teaching my kids that. Timing is everything with God, right? You've been hearing that forever. Jesus uses the example of a widow in the place of the Christian people who will be suffering in this time period when lawlessness abounds and injustice is everywhere you look, even in your own household. He's using the example of a widow to say, that's what you guys are going to feel like. I'm begging the judge for justice, and he just won't listen to me. Right? Are you following now? And so he asks this example, or he says this question at the end. when I come back, am I even going to find faith on the earth? Isn't it obvious why he asked that question? Because it is in the times where you and I feel that we're being treated unjustly that our faith is actually shown to have any metal. Isn't that true? When things are happening that are horrible to us, it's in those moments where Jesus looks and he says, faith, there it is. So he's saying, when I come back in that time period when injustice is rampant, will I even find a single person who's showing what true, genuine faith looks like? Because he knows this is hard. As we steer this in for a landing, I got 5 minutes left. When you seek to justify your action, remember at the beginning I said it makes you an unjust judge? Remember I said that at the beginning? Listen, no matter what you do with the rest of your day, you're going to leave this building and you're going to start judging things. Right now, you're looking at me and you're judging. I hope you are. You're judging whether or not the words that are coming out of my mouth are in fact the truth. And the only way that you'll know that is if you know the Bible. Otherwise, your judgment of me and this sermon is going to be based on your own opinions and preferences. And in all honesty, it doesn't really matter what you say. But if you come to me and you say, listen, your sermon didn't match up with something that I found here, you need to explain yourself. Well, then I want you to be my judge because you're coming to me out of love and you're going to help me to be able to stand before God and say, I did what you called me to do. So your job is to judge this sermon and measure it against the Word of God, right? Well, when you leave here, you're going to be judging things all the time. And so you will become a judge with a distorted ability to reason when you start justifying sin in your own mind, saying, well, this is okay because of this. This is not okay because of that. You play God in your own mind. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I wanted to end with this quote. I thought about beginning with it, putting it in the middle, but I wanted it to end because I want it to be the last thing on your mind because he's so brilliant. If you've never read a book by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, I know a couple of you have. He's awesome. And this is a deep quote. So I wanted to show it to you at the end so it'll be thick on your mind. You might want to write it down or go back when this is online and reread it because it's deep. It took me a little while to let it sink in. Here's what Dietrich Bonhoeffer has to say about what we're talking about here. Okay? He says, self-justification, when you justify your deeds in your own estimation of this is right, that's wrong, self-justification and judging other people go together. They're hand in hand. Just as justification by grace and serving people go hand in hand. In a nutshell, what Bonhoeffer is saying, and again, you might need to go home and just dwell on this to let it sink in. I had to. What he's saying is, if you're one of these people who is constantly, and you know, if you're always judging other people, it's probably a good indication that you're also one of these people that has made self-justification a practice in your life. Here's how. You say to yourself, well, I only did that because I had to, because this, that, and the other thing forced me to do it. So it's acceptable. But this is not acceptable, and that's why I condemn those people for doing it. Do you see what Bonhoeffer's saying? He's saying those two things are going to exist in the same person, just as the person who is so gripped by being justified by grace, which all of us are. God, you're willing to say that I'm right in your eyes? Justified, meaning it's just as if it never happened. Isn't that a beautiful thing about your sin? Justified means it's just as if it never happened. He says you get that by grace. Those people who've been gripped by that, they're the ones who you're going to see serving the most. They're compelled to it. They're drawn to it. Let's close. The reason I wanted to preach this sermon the way that I did, not just because it was next in line, but because I think this is a big problem for the Christian church. Getting revenge, getting what we think is ours, not just in our homes. I see it happening. Ashley and I have seen it happen in our own marriage. What am I doing? Why am I trying to make Ashley feel bad about something that she did, or she trying to make me feel bad? What are we doing? Vengeance is mine, declares the Lord. And here's what I want to leave you with. The King is coming. He's coming. And according to the New Testament, justice has been handed over to Jesus. The Father has handed over judgment to Jesus. And He will uncover every single sin that has ever been committed against you. So if you're crying out to the King of Kings, when will you avenge us? You will have good company, because the martyrs in Revelation cried out for the same thing. When, oh God, when will you avenge us? He hears you and He's coming. Be patient and wait on the King of Kings. Father, I thank you that you exact perfect justice because we cannot. I thank you also that you looked upon our books filled with sin and you said, yeah, I can cover that. Thank you, O righteous judge, that you looked at my life and said, all of that man's sins, past, present, and future, I can pay for. I thank you on behalf of everyone in this church for that truly miraculous fact. And now help us, O God, to worship the righteous judge of the universe in spirit and in truth for His sake and our joy. Amen.